3 years ago, I started a phone flipping business with just a few $100, and that business completely changed my mindset. Today, I'm building a completely different business in real estate investing. Here's why. My name is Hanny. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm also a community builder. If it's your first time here, make sure to subscribe and hit the like on this video, man. So my journey started literally 3 years ago when I started flipping phones out of my apartment, right? And I started this business with low capital. I remember like it was yesterday. I looked around my house and I had a bunch of devices that I had to sell. So when people talk about you can start a business with $0, I literally just took the phones I had in my living room and I started selling them. I remember my first phone, I think I made like $100 profit. And then my second one, you know, in combined, I was able to sell both phones and start the business with $365. When I got into that business, I learned so many things. I remember my third month into the business, I had got robbed where I lost like $50,000. And I've talked about those stories many times. I've actually gotten robbed multiple times in that business, probably like 5 times. Just because in the beginning, when you're starting any kind of business, you want to make money, right? That's your ultimate goal. And so for me at that time, I was trying to get out of my 9-to-5 job. So the only way to do that was I had to make money, right? And I had to essentially, any kind of customer I would meet, I would go make that transaction without looking at the downsides, without really having any sort of guidance, principles. So when I started to do the business, I learned a lot. I learned things like marketing, sales, just communication, how to deal with people, right? And as I kind of grew the business, I never really learned about the finance portion. So I was making, I remember my first month to the business, I made I think $1,000 or so. And then my second month, I made like $3 grand. And then my third month, I made like 15 grand because I met this one big supplier who supplied me a bunch of devices, and then I was able to just compound. So I just kept reinvesting back into the business. And as the business kind of grew, I realized that, I got tired of selling just one device. I wanted to sell in volume. So then I started looking at companies like Costco, Walmart, and these big companies, and I was like, how are these guys making so much money? And then I realized they sell volume, right? So when you look at these big companies, right, what they do essentially is they don't sell you like 1 or 5 items. They sell you hundreds of items at wholesale, right? Because they work with other wholesalers who give them the products, right? So I said, okay, so is that how these companies are making so much bread? And then especially if you look at the buyback business, right, what Amazon is doing with all these different companies like Verizon, AT&T, right? They get a bunch of product in, right? What happens is that people, right, they buy something from Amazon and then 2 weeks later they say, oh, I don't want this device anymore. So what happens? It goes into recycling, right? So now there's someone in the back end who's essentially getting these devices, right, at a very good price, and they're essentially selling them back to the open market, right? So I was able to discover and find some people who are essentially doing that, who work for Bell, who work for organizations like Rogers, and I was able to essentially get a bunch of devices, a bunch of product, and then I started doing wholesaling, and then essentially in the market that I'm in, I started distributing products all over the city that I'm in. As I started to do this, though, I realized that the biggest constraint is you need capital, right? As you go on in this journey. So let's say, for example, at minimum, if you wanted to make 50 grand, you would need at least hundreds and hundreds of maybe 500 worth of phones, right? Just to store them in capital. So as I kind of went on, I learned how to do lead generation. I started doing marketing. I learned how to do sales. And as the business kind of grew, number one is I didn't really track as much as I should have been, right? Because at the end of the day, every single time I would make money, I would reinvest back into the business. And then essentially, as the business kind of grew, I forgot to keep some for myself, right? Because at the end of the day, once you make bread, right, you got to keep some for yourself. But what happens in this business is that as you kind of grow, right, because you're buying so much products, every time you make money, so if you make 5K, reinvest that 5K back, right, you got to buy more products with that 5K. So the business is really just, you have to buy products. If you don't got no products, you can't make no money. Right? That's why fundamentally speaking, you make money on the buy. You don't make money when you sell. So as I kind of went on to the journey, the lessons that I learned really is just like making sure you're tracking everything, making sure you have a bookkeeper, making sure that you're working with the right people. And then also too, I got in partnerships, right? I found this one person and he said, hey, I want to work with you. I want to learn everything from the business and I want to partner up with you and we could do a split. And I said, okay, bet. He's like, I'll invest X amount of dollars and I'll help you out, and whatever we make, we can walk away, each of us, right? So I got into a partnership agreement with this one person, and it didn't really go too good on my end, because then I started to put in X amount of effort. He didn't put in the same effort as me, and then you realize at the end he wanted his payout, but then you realize he wasn't putting in the same effort as me, and that kind of really taught me a lot about trust and partnerships, because at the end of the day, if you get into any kind of partnerships, you want to make sure you get with the right people, because then if the business is going uphill, right, and he wants his percentage, but you're putting in, as a CEO, you're putting in all the effort, all the work, and then it becomes like, oh, I want this because I felt like I've put a percentage in this business. But it's like, you know what I mean? So that was kind of a constraint, because then when the business was not going so good, he would come in and say, hey, where is my money, right? But he's not even putting in any kind of work. So it's understanding as you kind of go on that journey, right? Like making sure you're actually doing the business and learning it, right? And so now my next phase into what I'm doing now is I'm into real estate, primarily focused on real estate wholesaling, and then eventually I'm going to get into buying rental properties and getting into wealth acquisition. The reason why I got into real estate wholesaling, which I've been doing for the last like 2 years now, in the beginning it was just to experiment, to see the things that I learned in the phone business, if I could do those same things that I learned from like talking to sellers, negotiating, wholesaling, because I was already doing wholesaling across Canada. So I said, okay, can I do this real estate thing? Like how can I get into this business? So then I hired a coach, because I'm like, I can't do it. Like, I don't really know where to get started. So then I invested like 10 grand into a coach. And I said, okay, hey, teach me everything you know about this business. And at that time, I didn't really know about acquisition. Like, how do you actually find these distressed properties? How do you find off-market deals, right? Because the biggest thing is like, you know, I knew how to get products in the phone business. I knew how to go on marketplace, negotiate. I knew how to build a relationship with vendors. But with this, I had to go and actually start from nothing, from scratch again. And I had to build a buyer's list, because in the phone business, I had a massive buyer's list if I had a bunch of product. So very similar business models, except real estate was a bigger ticket item. So if I'm selling a phone, for example, that's $1,000. Now, when I got into real estate, it was $100,000. So my mindset had to change. The belief system had to change. I had to tell myself that I can actually do this, right? And the reason why I got into real estate, like primarily, is because I found out that there's just way bigger problems to solve. Because I got to the point where my phone business, the problems were just not big enough, right? And so as you kind of grow, you just realize that you want to just do more, and you feel like you have way more in the tank to do. And I just felt like real estate, like every single time I went out there, people are going through divorce, they're going through foreclosure, people are losing their money to the bank, right? So the problems are much bigger, right? And the payout is much bigger on this side as well too. But of course, it still requires you to do the work. So when I got into real estate, I was able to do my first deal within 3 months, right? And so when I tell people this, it's like, how? At the end of the day, I hired a coach, because I didn't know anything about the business. I had to find someone that knew the business, who understood it, the ins and outs, because at the end of the day, I don't know much about the business. So I had to learn how to do marketing, how to do negotiation, right? How to do acquisition. So when he taught me those things, I said, okay, let me start executing on them. And then I started going out there in the field, talking to homeowners, and I was able to land my first deal. I remember I was dropping a flyer, because I had dropped like, I think 3,000 to 5,000 flyers that month. And I was able to just, boom, find a deal, right? And that just let me know that like this is actually possible. But at that time when I was doing it, I was still doing my phone business. So in a day, if I was like spending like 6 hours in my phone business, after that, I would go drop flyers, and I would spend another 3 hours. So I'd be outside till like 12 in the morning, 12 at night. And then I had to go to sleep, and I didn't really just have much time. So it got to a point where I was focusing on 2 things, and I realized I need to just focus on one thing. But at the end of the day, it's like everything that I learned in that phone business, I was able to take that into real estate. And now it's just like, the business is much more, it's a bigger market, right? So when we talk about TAM, right? TAM, total adjustable market. So when we look at the phone business, I don't like, there's a number, right? It's probably in the millions or tens of millions or whatever. But in real estate, the TAM is way larger, because it's a huge market, right? They say like most millionaires come from real estate, right? Like it's one of the biggest wealth builders. But at the end of the day, like this business, there's nothing guaranteed. Like you're not gonna come in and make X amount of dollars that's not fruition. You still have to put in the work. Like, you still have to find the deals. You got to put them on the contract. You got to find the buyer for them, because I'm doing real estate wholesaling. You got to do marketing. If your phone is not ringing, then you're really not in business. Because on the other side, when I was doing phones, right, I could just buy a bunch of products today and I can make money today. But in real estate, it's like you have to really work on your marketing, right? You have to work on your lead generation, right? So the more leads that you have to figure out which one out of those leads are going to make sense for you as well too, because sometimes some sellers, they want more than what they can get, right? So we have to go through a bunch of leads to figure out that it's going to work for our business model, because as a real estate investor, we're trying to buy properties that need a lot of work, distressed properties. Sometimes they could be turnkey, but majority of the time, right, they need a lot of work, essentially, for us to work for our business model, because we can't buy something that's fully renovated and expect to make money, right? Because at the end of the day, you make money on the buy. You don't make money when you sell. So if we're looking at a property, right, and we know that the property is worth, let's say, $150,000. We look at the ARV, the after repair value, to see how much it's actually worth after all fixed up. Let's say if it's 250 to 260, so now we know, okay, this is a good ballpark. Now we know, okay, how much money is it going to cost the renovation to go in? So let's say, for example, it's like 50 grand to renovate this property. Now we're in it for $200,000, right? Then we look at the comps on an area, right? If we look at a bunch of comparables and say, okay, there's some comparables going for 270 or maybe 280 or maybe 275, right? Then that kind of gives us a little bit of hope to know, okay, we actually got a $50,000 margin in this property. So real estate, a lot of time, is just a numbers game, right? Everything comes down to the numbers. And if you're not doing your due diligence, if you're just buying something, because we're in the business of essentially moving product, we're doing wholesaling, but at the same time, we can't just tie up any single property, because that's why the numbers have to make sense. But sometimes we could look at what our buyers like, what they like to buy, right, to see exactly what we can give them, right? So that's why for me, I'm consistently working on my buyers list to make sure that I'm building relationships. I'm making sure I'm connecting with people, and I know what they like to buy, and whether it's a duplex, whether it's a turnkey, a fixer upper, right? Maybe they're looking to build their rental portfolio. So I like to ask those things to know exactly what they want to buy in the market. So this is my conclusion, man. This is why I got into this business model. At the end of the day, man, I love doing business. I love, me going out there, talking to people, communicating with them. And, you're going to see more real estate content. I think the phone business, like arbitrage, it still works. You can still buy devices. You can still buy low, sell high. That business model will never run out. Just for me, at this current stage where I am, I've just realized, I just want to do more. I want to get into essentially one day get into multifamily, do bigger deals, right? Massive wholesale fees, like 50 grand, maybe 100 grand wholesale fees, which I actually was doing a little bit of virtual wholesaling. And 2 years ago when I first started the business, I jumped to virtual wholesale. I remember my 5th month or 6th month into the business, I was crazy at that time. I wanted to jump into the next level, which that kind of humbled me, because I had to reflect and say, okay, I'm not actually ready to jump into the USA wholesaling just yet. I need to focus on Canada first. So that's what I did. And then now we just been consistently growing the business, and things are going well so far. Like I said, I've been building a lot of relationships. The business is actually moving the way I didn't expect it to be this slow, but of course, like any kind of business, nothing happens overnight. But I'm willing to stick it out. I'm willing to trust the process. And I think as long as you have that faith, you got that obedience to know that things will work out one day, that's all you can really hope for, man. So I hope you found this video helpful, man. I just wanted to share my story, wanted to be honest with y'all. So man, make sure to stay on the next video, and we're gonna stay updated, and make sure to hit that subscribe